Greetings and welcome to a special Morrowind 15th anniversary podcast talking with some of the members at Tamriel Rebuilt. Tamriel Rebuilt is one of the oldest projects in the Elder Scrolls modding community, and today we're going to be talking a bit about the history of Tamriel Rebuilt and also its future. If you'd like to just go ahead and introduce yourselves real quick.
Okay, I'm Gnomey.
Hello, I'm Kevaar.
Hello, I'm Rats.
Hello, I'm Atrayonis.
Now, before we get into a ton of questions here, I'm kind of curious, what brought each of you to join Tamriel Rebuilt, and what's your role on the project?
Okay, what brought me to join it were the screenshots, now, very old screenshots, I'm not sure even exist anymore, which sort of captured my imagination. And I started out helping PR with concept art and making interiors. And then eventually I started doing exteriors, and now I've become a lead developer, and so I tend to focus a bit more on lore now. I occasionally do a bit of exterior work as well. So I've sort of done various tasks for TR.
I sort of joined more or less by accident. I was active in IRC back in 2005, and the Tamriel IRC channel was on the same network that the official Bethesda, sort of official Bethesda channel was. And I drifted in and out over the years. I became more or less active only in 2015, became an interior developer, and now I'm a lead developer, an administrator. I'm sort of the webmaster kind of guy, and take part of the back end, the technical back end.
So I actually joined when I was 14. My brother was the one who got me into the game and then into Tamriel Rebuilt. I remember him showing me this interior that he had been making for one of the Tobani places and wanted my help putting more furniture and character into it, so I helped with that. Then I went to school for however many years, and I came back only recently. I do writing and quest developing, and about a year ago I became a lead developer. Sorry, I help put all that together, and sometimes I also do wrangling of newer members.
Yeah, I have like a similar story like the other three people here. So that I first heard of TR many years ago. I think I wasn't in high school even yet in high school, and a friend of mine showed these, like the old PR page had this concept art made by Zephyr, and these were like these old pictures of different kinds of Khajiit, like the cat people, and I was like, oh, this is so amazing, I must do something for this project. But then I couldn't do like anything. I was really bad at everything back then, and I knew nothing about modding. So I kind of forgot about the project, but then I was having like this bit of an year off from college, and in 2012, and then I remembered this lovely project and decided to come and help. And sure enough, now I'm a lead developer too, and I mainly do exterior work right now. And I also do some texture work as well. Interestingly enough, that's a bit of a new thing.
Now, Tamriel Rebuilt is by far the oldest modding project in the Elder Scrolls modding community, starting even before Morrowind itself was released, technically, so I thought we could, start out with our actual questions here by discussing a few of your memories of Tamriel Rebuilt and your history of the project, and what's changed since you all joined. Obviously, some of you are newer, so I'm kind of interested to hear each of your perspectives.
Okay, I joined in 2005. I actually forgot how old I was then. Something like 15 or so. And yeah, at the time TR still had its Hammerfall project going. And so there was quite a lot of activity and quite a lot of different things going on. And I was quite active at that time, but very much sort of, on the lower level. I didn't really know the sort of planning that was going on in the project. I mostly just took part in various discussions and made my concept art and so on. And then I actually left the project for a relatively long time to finish up school, which I think it's also quite a common thing in the project. And then when I came back, actually quite shortly after starting to do some exterior work for the project again, I ended up getting involved in the sort of more internal planning. And that was also quite an active time in a different way, because the project was sort of going through a reorganization process. It had dropped the Hammerfall project a while back, and it was sort of trying to reorient itself a bit, because the project had a rough time back then. And so then I ended up basically being part of the planning and becoming a lead developer. And since then I've been pretty much only doing web planning stuff and know what lead developers do, basically.
So I think I came in and they were still trying to figure out how to take a bunch of modders and put all their work together and have it work in the game world. I can remember seeing screenshots of exteriors where you'd have someone halfway through a mountain, and the next person in the next cell over was just this big, long, flat plain, and trying to get those to go together. I can remember things like them trying to get the monster spawning to behave. You would like walk out really far out, where in the vanilla game there's only water, and you'd find like these little droog heads sticking up out of the land mass, because they hadn't figured out how to get those to change into like Kagudi or Alets or other creatures. Back then I pretty much only did writing, and I was only like 14 years old, so the quality wasn't really that great. Every so often someone will come in and show me something that I wrote way back when, and I'll kind of have to like hide my face and be embarrassed for a little while. It's really surprising sometimes to me, because I've actually forgotten a lot of the things I submitted back then.
I can totally relate to that, what Kevaar just said. I remember, when I was in high school, I did make an interior showcase for TR under a different username, and one of my interiors is still in like the old TR map 1, and then I forgot about the existence of this interior cell, and then when I was playing in the old TR map 1 area, I just accidentally found this old bandit lair that I had made when I was 15, so that was a bit of a surprise. What I think is what has changed the most since I joined TR is obviously this the new way we are organized. Like when I joined, it was really like there was this inner core that was almost like a clandestine secret society thing. And back then it was a huge deal for me personally when I made it to like this top of this ladder, this inner circle I made it in, and it was a huge thing for me. But obviously nowadays everything is much more transparent, and it's almost democratic. Well, actually it's not, but there is an illusion of democracy here.
Right, so for for the better part of a decade, I pretty much only hung out in IRC every other month or every couple of months. So I never really got into old TR, could comment on how it was organized or what has specifically changed. So I came back when the reorganization sort of hit its biggest snack, basically lack of people. They had decided to reorganize, and then half of them eventually left and petered out, sort of. And that's where I stepped in and helped reorganize it into its current form. And that's aside from the technical backend what I'm doing.
Now, I'm kind of curious, what do you think is the biggest accomplishment Atari Rebuilt over the last 15 years?
For my part, I actually think that in a way the largest accomplishment is actually basically, as such a large project and a volunteer project at that both the sort of mistakes that TR made and what TR did well is, I think, something that other volunteer projects and projects in general can learn a lot from. And people who join TR, I mean, they're of course doing it voluntarily and just because they want to do it. But they often learn a lot of skills in TR. Concept artists get better, they receive critique and so on, which they can use to improve what they do. And I, for example, have just a lot of experience from various levels with TR, which otherwise I would not have had. And so I think in that way, for me, the biggest accomplishment of TR is actually almost, not what it creates, so that's also a huge accomplishment, but what it sort of brings in general to the table for both its members and for other projects.
There's basically two things that stand out to me that TR has accomplished. The first one is getting an actual release out. And it's easy to say now that this is not very specific or very important, but it was done 6 years after the project was founded. There was a change of leadership and people involved in between. And at this time, I, among most other people, were of the opinion that TR was vaporware. And the first actual release, the Talvani Isles, reaffirmed a lot of people that TR was actually happening, and it wasn't just another pipe dream. And the second one is that TR itself is still around in one form or the other. We've had at least 2 very big leadership changes. The first one, 2003, around where Kevaar became active, and the last one, 2014 to 2016. And other projects have died from these changes, or they would have died from the infighting, and TR is still going strong. Everything else, somebody else could do, but this is special to me and special to the project.
I think I mostly echo what everyone else has said. That it's kind of set the stage, I think, for the large landmass mods. I know a splinter group of people from Tamriel Rebuilt went on to recreate Stirk and Oblivion. And now we've got Skywind, of course, and we've got all the Beyond Skyrim province mods that are kind of doing the same thing, except, of course, in the Skyrim engine. And I think the greatest accomplishment really is just over the years, our landmass is maybe 3 to 4 times the size of the vanilla game. For the most part, it's more detailed. The lore is quite in-depth, and we're still going.
Yeah, I have almost nothing new to add to these comments others have said. It's just like Atrayonis said previously, that there have been some dark times, but we've gotten through them, and we're still alive, and that's pretty amazing.
Alright, and I have to agree with some of the things that you've said here. TR Rebuilt has definitely paved the way for practically all the major landmass mods and other projects that we know of today. I mean, people forget this, but TR Rebuilt was sort of the first major big-time modding project for Morrowind that actually carried through with an actual release in 2007 and 2008, and projects like Skywind are sort of, following in their footsteps. And it's been a huge influence, specifically on the Morrowind modding community, and, I'm kind of curious, what do you see TR Rebuilt's role being in the larger Morrowind modding community?
When I think of TR, I think of all of the organization that goes on behind it. You're talking about literally hundreds of modders over, almost 2 decades now, coming together and getting all their things to work together properly. And it just kind of helped the modding community learn, what pieces go here, what pieces go there. Do we need someone to work on writing while someone else is doing the actual quest design? And just getting all those little pieces to fit together.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. I think TR is doing it's doing a service to those Morrowind modders who would probably not mod themselves alone. It offers a platform on which one can work on. Like for example, I myself, I haven't ever released anything on my own, and I probably would never release. I wouldn't have released anything if it wasn't for TR. So TR is a very useful venue for modders who wouldn't otherwise mod. So I think that's a huge service to the community.
I think Tamriel, through Tamriel data, is trying to act a bit like a collection of assets for starter, together with the province project Tamriel mods, which can be joined by other modders' resources if they wish, to act as a common pool, a common unified pool with a unified syntax. The landmass we have sort of plots out all other island mods that used to be in these places. So I guess that is a pretty large impact, and it is a good example of how collaborate modding can produce something that will be very big and very very big, which is something that in this modern age of mostly one people projects is something that I think has become rather sparse.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that as far as sort of the influence in the larger Morrowind modding community has gone, a lot of the time TR has sort of existed in its own bubble almost, and I think that's sort of from both sides, that a lot of people who worked in TR didn't really use a lot of mods themselves, and weren't necessarily very involved in the modding community, the broader one. And also, as was said earlier, for a long time, probably a large part of the modding community was convinced that TR was vaporware, and so didn't really get too involved with TR either. But, I mean, the points that were made earlier are quite good, that, you can, that people who wouldn't make mods themselves can release stuff through TR, and also, as said earlier, that they can sort of improve their skills so that they can make more ambitious mods themselves, private projects. But we also do quite often have members who are connected to specific other projects. I mean, for instance, Open Morrowind, if you count that as part of the modding community, and the other project mods, for instance. And with that always comes in a lot of interaction with those mods, and so it's sort of on a very individual and case-by-case basis often.
Well, sort of what I was getting at there is that Tamriel Rebuilt is sort of a flagship of the Morrowind modding community in a way. It's it's one of the projects that people see when they're looking from outside the community into the Morrowind modding community. You think of Tamriel Rebuilt or possibly Morrowind Rebirth. They're basically the two major projects that are still getting regular news coverage to some degree, like PC Gamer still does some news articles for Tamriel Rebuilt or Morrowind Rebirth on occasion, Rock Paper Shotgun, and things of that nature. So I guess what I'm getting at is that Tamriel Rebuilt is, kind of what people think of when they think of the Morrowind modding community to a certain degree.
I think this is a bit misleading. Tamriel Rebuilt might be a flagship project. It might be the flagship project aside from Morrowind Rebirth, because it's one of the two big projects, or three or four, if we are honest, that are actually still around. Because looking at the Morrowind modding community, it's still there, but it's considerably less active than the more second generation one of Skyrim, which does have the bigger, more flashy mods. And Tamriel Rebuilt is seen by quite a lot of people as something that only happens to others, sort of made up by modders in black, rather impersonal and unapproachable, sort of like a company or something. And that is sort of the danger of being a flagship project or being as long running as TR has been. It's untypical for a mod.
Yeah, I think that for me, I mean, for a while I was never too involved in the Morrowind modding community as such, for a while I did hang out in the Flickerty forums, where quite a lot of modding activity was done. And to me it just seems that TR is very separate. It isn't really representative of the broader community. I mean, all of the sort of project mods are like that. I think that my perception of most Morrowind modding is that it is more on an individual basis, and modders work on their own thing and release it and so on. And TR, through being a project, just is very different, and I think to a degree can tend to exist in a bit of a bubble in that way, as Atrayonis said, that it's something that happens to someone else. So it isn't. I think it doesn't necessarily seem as personal to other Morrowind modders as the community otherwise does.
Someone once said to me that it was like the modding community was born in Morrowind and then matured in Skyrim, and I think that's true. Before we had, back in the days of Daggerfall, say, modding was more like hacking than actual modding. And then it was still kind of that way when Morrowind came along, and then people getting used to the idea that they could actually add things to their game. And now by Skyrim, you have things like people adding in the hypothermia mechanics, or the Care Bear player races, or other strange things like that. And some of them are starting to kind of trickle back to Morrowind as they enjoy the game. But yeah.
Well, sort of moving on to my next question here. Tamriel Rebuilt does have a sort of reputation to constantly redo things. I mean, Omolexia has, I think it might be on its 4th, possibly 5th reiteration at this point. The Lands of Telvonis are, scheduled to be redone again. And even Nakamura, at this point, as I understand it, is scheduled to be overhauled. And, as Haplo told me in our interview a couple of years ago, he mentioned that practically every part of Tamriel Rebuilt has been redone at least once. And why is that? Why does Tamriel Rebuilt, redo things so constantly?
Yeah, so what I'd say there is that I think that from the start, when Tamriel Rebuilt was founded, nobody, as I assume, I wasn't around then, but I assume that nobody really knew what they were doing, because a project like TR is unusual, and especially was at that time. And so I think the problem was that what people wanted out of TR and how the project actually was to start with was different from the very start. That the way the project was set up, it was basically sort of patchwork. Everyone grabbed a claim, created something in that claim, and then it was all patched together, and then it would be released. And so it was really a sort of communal project. But I think already from the start, everyone wanted a cohesive world, wanted this world-building experience that expands on the vanilla game. And for that, you need to plan, you need to do things in the proper order and so on. And so I think that sort of central problem with how TR started out sort of continued throughout the project. And people would say, this bit of the project isn't cohesive, so should we make it cohesive? And then some more, discussion occurs, some more planning occurs, and then, okay, that isn't cohesive, so should we make it more cohesive, and so on. And the other problem is that often people also got impatient at times and wanted to implement something quickly, and then later those people or other people reconsidered and said no, it wasn't well implemented. And all of these sort of things then cause this constant cycle of redoing. And I mean, what we've tried to do more recently is that we have tried to plan things more carefully and say, okay, everything gets, at most redone one more time, if that, and then we just leave it lying. But it's always very difficult because members come and go, issues come up and disappear again. So it's a problem that hopefully we've moved past, but honestly we probably haven't.
Basically, this is what the reorganization in 2014 to 2016 was mostly about, changing the entire workflow of planning from what was previously some sort of bottom-up development mixture to top-down planning. And part of the problem here is that some of the older decisions need to be reassessed. Almalexia is a very good example. I think it's its fourth current incarnation, and it will need to be redone again for two reasons. Basically, the decision that was made in 2014 that we are going to change vanilla content, which enables us to actually implement an Almalexia that is internally consistent. And for second, the problem that current Almalexia is simply a computer killer. Akamora itself is another problem that is one of those older decisions that we'll need to revisit in the future anyway. It was very enthusiastic planned because for some reason people seem to think that activity levels would be much, much higher than they actually are.
I think it's mostly just there's a difference between having a creative vision and then having the skills or the manpower to put it into a game and have it all work. And certainly, like from the early Telvanni areas, people's abilities to make the mod, to get the most out of the construction kit were less, and now we're a lot more skilled. We have a better idea of where we're going, and so there's the wish to go back and kind of smooth over everything and get it back up to standard.
Yeah, this is really like a radioactive topic and a source of great dissonance among us. Like I feel like we do get heated arguments over these what feel like constant redos of everything, and I think the others have already said or talked about the reasons behind these redos. Like there is this mismatch between enthusiasm and planning and the execution of those plans. Almalexia is obviously a great example of that. Like the city looks in its current stage. It's looking awesome, of course, but it's something that simply doesn't work at all. And Akamora is a painful thing to me. It's something that we have to resolve in the future, and I'm fearing that it won't be pretty, because I personally feel that like Atrayonis mentioned, the plans for Akamora's future revamp have been made without considering perhaps the amount of manpower we have. That's going to be an issue. I personally think that the Akamora redo is not going to happen and shouldn't happen. But that's something that we must discuss amongst ourselves. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, one concrete example I still actually want to make as far as redo is concerned, sort of picking up on I think Kevaar's point, is with, for example, TR's cliffs. That those, for example, are things that are redone for sort of practical reasons. That before you could only really make cliffs for Morrowind by basically taking Morrowind rocks and then increasing their scale and then piling them up. And then a while later, TR got some cliff assets, and so they started basically using those everywhere and redoing the piles of rocks. But then some people had issues with the quality of the cliff assets, and so that was all redone again, and you once again got piles of rocks. And now TR has some new cliff assets, and so that sort of thing, the availability of modelers. Often there's been a shortage of modelers, and so TR hasn't had all of the models to work with at once. And when those models suddenly become available, then there's often a desire to, go back and change everything to use those models. And so that's more on the practical end that can lead to redos. And then the other thing, though, and that's I think what we'll probably also get to talking about later, is that TR is also trying to sort of communicate its decisions better, and when we plan on doing a redo, we want to actually get better at communicating that to people so that they can comment on it and say, no, we don't want you to do that for this reason or whatever, and so that we can try and find a solution. And that's, that we don't really want to, hand down decisions, from top down, whether people like it or not. Obviously, in the end, the lead developers have final say, but we do actually want to, take into account people's opinions and see if we can work with them at least. So, and that's again the sort of problem with communication, that we are able to communicate our intentions and give people a chance to reply.
Well, I'm kind of surprised to hear that there's some manpower problems with Tamriel Rebuilt, because I was always under the impression that Tamriel Rebuilt was the most active modding project in the community, and I didn't realize that you guys were having any recruitment issues.
Yeah, we definitely do have recruitment issues, and I mean, again, modelers has always been a shortage. At the moment, we also have an issue with reviewers, which is especially difficult because reviewers need to first basically show that they're able to, create interiors or whatever, and then have to show that they're able to look at other people's interiors and find the errors and correct them. And so there are always shortages. And then another point is that TR is, of course, a volunteer project. And so we can't, generally we can only expect people to work on what they're interested in working on. And of course, people who become very invested in TR and, the leads and so on, will feel inclined to, fill in where there's nobody else working on something, to move the project along. But even so, there are often things that nobody who's there really wants to do. And that's, again, the earlier point that TR is something that happens to other people, that we often get people asking whether we can do this, whether we can do that. And I mean, often what we'd of course really like is if the people say, I would like to do this, with TR, can I implement it? And then we'd of course, give the person feedback and so on, and help the person implement it. But it's very hard for us, when people say, I think TR should do this, that the question is, who would do it? Because we're all volunteers. And that's a sort of common issue as far as manpower is concerned.
I think the manpower problem is something that just cannot be helped ever. It's something that is bound to happen with a project that is this large and where people are doing the work for free. Like we're doing work that is approximately 3 times the amount of work that the original Bethesda team made, and they got paid for it. So I think the project that is as big as TR is bound to have issues with manpower, regardless of anything.
I think our biggest issue really is that the game is aging. It's something like 15, 20 years old now. And so all the people who like to do modding have moved on to newer and shinier games like Skyrim. And so we've got a real shortage of people who actually know how to get into the construction set and do something with it. I'd be rich if I had a dime for every person who had an idea who could write the dialogue came along. And so lately it's kind of been my job of taking some of these people with a bunch of ideas and pushing them at the construction set to say, here, give it a chance. You'll like it, I promise. Go on, go.
There is ultimately never enough people. And a project like TR has the problem that its bureaucracy needs people that in general are not attracted to mods at all. Since it's not creative work, it's annoying work, it's basically just organization and not even creative writing. And this is where TR is currently most lacking, as this prevents us from processing all of our old backlog in time. So the most problematic thing is the lack of reviewers, as Gnomey has said, of bureaucracy, but this might be getting better soon. And then of the old leaders who had an idea what they were doing. We have basically recreated our current workflow from more or less scratch, and we might be getting new people into the old roles, but it will take a while. And the Morrowind modding community does not have the sheer amount of people that it used to have. And even if you could get them back from Skyrim, they would want to do their own thing first.
Yeah, I just want to add to a comment to what Atrayonis and Kevaar mentioned, that this idea that people have moved on to Skyrim, and I don't know if that's like for some people it might be true, but one could also say that this is also an advantage, though. Like the people who are left modding Morrowind are really devoted and passionate about this, and they love Morrowind and want to mod specifically for it. So there's like this like really hardened core group of Morrowind modders who I think will never disappear and who are left to mod it until the end of days, basically. So there is a very solid core group, I feel.
I think I agree with Reds, and one thing that I have noticed is that some of the Skyrim modders have already moved on to Fallout 4, continuing a pattern that I've seen first with Morrowind to Oblivion, then Oblivion to Skyrim, and Skyrim created a whole lot of second generation modders that are not the same people who have moved on from Oblivion. And the Fallout series attracted some of those people that abandoned their Oblivion projects, and now Fallout 4 has attracted some people who abandoned their Skyrim projects. And let's remember that Oblivion does have a couple of province mods, but it has a whole lot more province mods that just didn't. For example, a rather interesting Black Marsh mod that was abandoned due to lack of manpower. And considering this, that Morrowind is still older than Oblivion and Skyrim, and both of these games are seeing projects abandoned because their modders are moving on to shiny new things, I don't think we are doing that bad. There is a lack of manpower, but it's surprising that TR has the sheer amount of people that we do have.
Yeah, I just want to add this one little thing that I feel like what worries me the most is not Morrowind modders going away. It's the idea of players quitting on Morrowind that frightens me the most, because I feel like oftentimes those who mod for Morrowind don't necessarily play it as much as, say, non-modders. So I hope that once we are finished with this project, there are still people who are still playing Morrowind.
Yeah, I think Morrowind is the kind of game that will never be made again. So if there are no more players around, it will be because it has been actively killed. I don't think it will die. It hasn't died yet, and it had very good chances to, but I think it will last.
Yeah, it's a cult thing for sure. It feels like a cult thing, almost.
There are some new inductees. I see them posting on Reddit on occasion. So there is some new blood, and even some Skyrim players who come in and say, "Wow, I'm surprised. I've always heard Morrowind is bad. The graphics aren't so good, and the combat is clunky, but I really, really like it." It's just the more that the Elder Scrolls is moving to an action game series, just like Fallout, that Morrowind shines, because it was the last true RPG in the series, and the only one with a really alien world. The points that make Morrowind such a cult classic, I think, will always attract more people who are into cult classics, and there are new people like that, always.
And I think we can expect to see, at least I'm hoping we'll see, now with Elder Scrolls Online releasing their Morrowind download DLC, that maybe more people will start coming back to the game that started it all, and by extension find their way to Tamriel Rebuilt.
Just to sort of add my own comment here, as the host of Morrowind modding showcases, I have noticed that there are actually more modders coming to Morrowind from Skyrim than the other way around. I've seen quite a few modders that have abandoned Skyrim because they prefer Morrowind as a game and would rather mod for a game that they enjoy to a greater degree than Skyrim. And I've even seen a couple of Fallout 4, modders start to come our way to Morrowind, and that just kind of speaks volumes about the appeal of Morrowind as a game. And I have to say, I'm not really terribly worried about our community disappearing. As just an example, because I was curious, I did a comparison between newer Oblivion mods being released and newer Morrowind mods being released, and I found that in almost every case, the Morrowind mods had a higher engagement rate, they had more comments, they had more endorsements on the Nexus, and they had more people actually playing the mods, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, come to think of it, Morrowind is, in most ways, I'd say easier to mod than the later games, though there are some quality of life things that later construction sets have. And also, of course, with the later games, they have the limitation of basically full voice acting, and in general with the dialogue, which is a lot more difficult, while in Morrowind it's text, it's a lot easier to have sort of complex plots and so on in Morrowind.
Yeah, just to go along with that, a lot of people coming to Morrowind are still trying to get used to how the dialogue is topic-based rather than the tree dialogue in Skyrim. And certainly for me, I sometimes wish that the Morrowind dialogue was like Skyrim's. But on the other hand, Skyrim has voiced, everybody is voiced. And that's yet another thing that there's more ideas than there are talents out there. And so we're kind of lucky in that regard of, if you want to put together a good story mod, you just get in and write it out. In Morrowind, you don't have to worry about finding someone to then voice all your characters.
So, kind of moving on, I was sort of curious, is there anything that the community should be doing to perhaps, help recruitment at Tamriel Rebuilt, like perhaps something that the Morrowind Modding Showcases YouTube channel should be doing, or something that the Morrowind Modding Discord server should be doing, or, something of that nature?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the problem of recruitment is chiefly in TR's court. But what other people could help first is to understand that TR is not a lifelong commitment. I know that it's sort of intimidating to hear about showcases and quality and everything, quality control and everything. But TR is built on the idea that a modder can just come in, leave a claim or two behind, a finished claim or two behind, or a bit of writing, or a quest idea, or a mesh, an asset, whatever, and then just fly out again and do their own thing. And it would also be very helpful if people would help with documentation.
Yeah, one thing that I will say is that I think, as Atrayonis said, with basically with making the showcase and so on, that can be intimidating. We only really require the showcase, though, if you want to implement things in the CS. And there are other ways to contribute to TR. And so, for example, if you can make models, or if you want to do some writing and so on, you can just go in and start contributing, or and start taking part in discussions also on our Discord and so on. So I think some people might think there's a higher barrier to entry than there actually is in most cases. But I do definitely agree with Atrayonis that the sort of ball isn't TR's court as far as getting better at recruitment. And that is, again, I think, the issue that a lot of TR members, myself included, don't really actively take part in the broader Morrowind modding community. And so often there's lack of communication, and that's sort of very difficult to surmount. As say, sometimes there are individuals within TR who are connected to a particular community, like the people at Open Morrowind, but otherwise often that just isn't the case, and again there's sort of wall between the two, I feel.
So I think the Elder Scrolls has a pretty dedicated fan base that's kind of grown beyond the individual games that started it. I mean, you go onto Reddit and people are posting like 10 posts a day there about the lore. And many of those things are things that actually came from Morrowind. I think the best thing we can do is to kind of harness that enthusiasm and bring that back to TR. I know for me, it gets a little difficult when some of the later games like Elder Scrolls Online have kind of departed from that feel of Morrowind. And so sometimes I'll get people coming to me saying things like, why did you change this? That's not what it's like in this later game. And so I have to kind of scramble a bit to explain, this is why we're different. But overall, just remembering that we all love that lore. And I think for Tamriel Rebuilt, at least, our quality kind of speaks for itself. And so it's somewhere for people who love the game, who love all the intricacies, like of the metaphysics. They can come here and they can express it and they can put it out in a game form.
I'm going to more or less just repeat what has been said before regarding making the threshold very low for people to contribute to TR, like Atrayonis and Gnomey said. Like, for example, Kevaar mentioned those lore pieces that people still write, and those could, with little work, those little lore pieces could become in-game books that TR could use, that sort of thing. And and I really have to thank you, Dark Elf Guy, for advertising us on your channel, like making those trailers and whatnot. It's really the kind of PR work that we should be doing ourselves, really, but you are doing us a great service. So yeah, thank you for that.
We did have a series of PR people who wanted to facilitate communication with the wider community, but those usually just appeared and disappeared again over time. What I would specifically hope the Reddit and the other Discords to do is to stop referring to TR as much as a monolithical entity as they have been doing. Specifically, that TR is made up of the same people that it was 10 years ago, that they never learn anything, or that to communicate with TR you need to come and post in our forums. We do have a Discord, for example. We still have an IRC channel, Facebook account or something, and this does take some bizarre forms. For example, Rod, one of our lead developers, created a testbed mod for a unified guilds between the mainland and the Vardenfell vanilla factions, and then he was asked about why TR wouldn't include that into its mod, and the people sometimes just simply would not understand that he is a lead developer or involved in TR at all. They consider TR to be that one thing, an amorphous mass of modding, and just getting other people to understand that TR is made of individual modders would go a long way to help recruitment, I think.
Yeah, and I very much agree with that point, and I think that that's also, again, that when TR makes a decision to redo something or such, that often, the more major the redo is, the more disagreement you have within TR, and it's often a sort of hard compromise or hard decision that's reached after a lot of discussion. And so, again, TR is not this sort of monolith that makes these decisions, but it's very much possible to basically go in there and ask, why the decisions were made, and and I mean, of course, in the end, we might still, make whatever decision. Of course, that's again a sort of job of the lead designers, that you don't just go with the wind but give the project a concrete direction. But still, again, TR isn't a monolith, and as an individual you can actually do quite a lot in TR without being a lead developer. If you're, as an LUD, if you take part in discussions, definitely if you're willing to really contribute content to the mod. Yeah, and one other thing to say is that the sort of reverse of that on the one hand TR itself isn't monolithic, is that sometimes it is also hard to tell both within TR and in interactions with the community whether a TR member is speaking for themselves or speaking for TR. And that's of course always challenging because nobody wants to add 50 disclaimers to every post. But yeah, that's another challenge always to communicate, because it could be that when somebody says this thing is getting redone or whatever, that it's more their opinion than TR's. And so that has definitely led to confusion on TR before, where somebody asked, what's being done about this, and then got an answer they didn't like, but it isn't really TR's answer as a whole. It either hasn't been completely discussed or whatever. So yeah, that's always an issue.
Which kind of goes into think we're a volunteer project, and so our members come and go, our leadership comes and goes, and with that, ideas change, opinions change.
Well, perhaps I'm just not paying that close of attention, I guess, but I hadn't really realized that there was this perception of Tamriel Rebuilt as a monolith before. I mean, obviously the project's been around for a long time. About 600 to 700 modders have gone through the doors of Tamriel Rebuilt at one point or another, and obviously that you guys aren't going to have the exact same positions on everything throughout all of time. And anyway, I suppose I wanted to ask about lowering the barrier of entry, because that is sort of a major, topic about getting people to sign up with a major modding project like this, is that the barrier of entry can be a bit intimidating, like, doing an interior showcase or doing a questing showcase. For some reason, a lot of people think questing is, in particular, very difficult when it isn't, really that difficult. So is there something that should be done to perhaps make it seem like it would be easier to mod for Tamriel Rebuilt?
Well, I mean, let's say, already the real barrier to entry is quite low, in that you can already come into Discord, for instance, and basically start joining in discussions, and you can already, right away you can post if you have the models or concept art or whatever. And so I think that's already that you don't need to, even if you do want to basically make interiors or make quests or whatever, you don't necessarily need to, start right away with a showcase. But if you want to do quests, for example, it's always good to basically to take part in discussions about writing, and that we can already plan out quests and dialogue and so on without doing it as a without worrying about the CS implementation, and so you don't need a showcase for that. And so I think that's just to encourage people to just come around and get a feel for the project and interact with people in the project, and then slowly just start contributing.
I think something to keep in mind is it's a learning process. There's still things I'm learning about the scripting, and I've had new members come in and do something that just blows me away, but maybe they're not as good as in my talent with the writing. And to me, that's why we have so many different roles, because it's like, okay, you can script, but you can't write, or hey, you can write, but you can't script real well. And so we just tie those things together, and then we have a whole. It's really kind of making use of what we have. It's a little like going through a scrap pile and finding all these amazing things, bits and pieces, and then putting them all together. To me, at least, that's gratifying about the whole process.
Yeah, I have to say that the perception of modding for TR being difficult, that's not completely unfounded. It's because it used to be. We used to be so strict I think others will agree that in the olden days, say 6, 7, 5 years ago or something, making a showcase for VR was really intimidating. For example, interiors, we used to be really strict about items floating or bleeding into stuff, and even like this, the most microscopic of errors would be pointed out to you, and there was this 3 strikes and you're out rule or something like that. That if you didn't pass on 3 tries, you would have to start over completely. So we used to be like too critical, and we got stuck with that reputation, I think. Nowadays we are a lot nicer and a bit more relaxed, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely were stricter before. I mean, the 3 strikes and you're out wasn't for the showcase, as I understood it, but was after you completed your showcase. If you basically make an interior and then it gets rejected 3 times by reviewers because it has too many errors, then you have to make a showcase again. That's how it was. And yeah, we don't really do that anymore. But I might have misunderstood it.
Oh, that actually, I didn't know that. That sounds a lot more harsher. That you get demoted if you fail too many times.
I'm not sure if it was ever enforced, though. I mean, I just know that was how the rules stood on the website. And, I mean, it didn't come up too often either, to be frank. So I think it was really only for special cases. But either way, I do think that the showcase tends to be a bit harsher because it's more that basically once you've completed the showcase process, then you've made a real improvement. You know, that's what one notices. One really gets better with modding, and so one makes less errors in the first place. And so it's a sort of big hurdle that you have to overcome. But then once you've overcome it, then it's not as bad, and especially now. And then the other thing is that, at least I found that with the showcase process, that even though it was quite intimidating, that the people are generally sort of helpful and do sort of help you through it and provide a lot of useful feedback. And again, your skills really do improve, which is always nice to see. So, I mean, I definitely see how it's intimidating, but I also think it is rewarding as an experience in and of itself.
Yes, the intimidation factor regarding the showcases is kind of what I wanted to get at there. I mean, I've constantly thought about, doing a video series on, getting an interior showcase or a questing showcase through Tamriel Rebuilt, but I've never actually gotten around to it because, to be honest, I'm a bit intimidated myself by the Tamriel Rebuilt showcasing guidelines because I'm not entirely sure I would be able to pass them.
I mean, I think for my part, again, with being able to pass it, it is just that we don't really expect somebody to come in and pass in the first try. I mean, it has happened, but again, the expectation is actually that you learn through the showcase process and get better. And so even if you aren't able to make good interiors at all to start with, that the idea is that the showcase process will allow you to. And I mean, going back to the point that usually the showcase is more difficult than the actual practice, that in showcases we generally expect people to use the Dunmer poor furniture, and that is rather notorious because it is all uneven surfaces, and of course we expect people to, place objects on those surfaces correctly, and that's very annoying and very tedious. But TR does actually have flat versions of those models, which you can use for actual interiors in TR, So you don't have to worry about the stupid Dunmer poor furniture placement again after you've completed your showcase. So, but it is indeed a sort of process that you have to go through once.
I just wanted to add that, at least in my experience, no one has really passed their first showcase, so you're kind of all in the same boat there. I know for mine, people were picking up things that I had never even realized were issues before, and I'm glad now that they pointed those things out to me because I think it made me a better writer, made me a better quest developer, and it also gave me a feel for like what Tamriel Rebuilt itself is. Picking out pieces of like, this doesn't really follow our lore here, and so that got me interested in looking at what Tamriel Rebuilt has set up for like the various houses, the various great houses of Morrowind as storylines.
Yeah, and I think that also the showcase isn't all just about pointing out clear, placement errors or whatever, but I think it is also a way for people to sort of learn how we, sort of what we as TR, specifically expect from interiors and so on, and our specific standards. And that's not really something that you can know without joining TR, that even if you're a very capable modder, that there might still be some sort of peculiarities that TR expects you to do, which you never thought about before. And there might be some other things you do that aren't strictly necessary for TR. So it's also a bit about familiarity as well, as opposed to just, fixing errors.
I think with the showcases, there's also this like a hidden agenda of it being also a test of how well you cooperate, or how well you can work with others. I think nothing tests that like nitpicking on the smallest of errors. It's also a test of how you take criticism.
Well, my showcase isn't so far back that I don't remember it. It was sort of odd because I made an interior showcase, and it was the first interior that I've ever created from scratch, and it worked in like 3 or 4 revisions, so it's not that intimidating, or shouldn't be that intimidating. But yeah, actually working with your reviewer is something that is much more important than just getting it right the first time, and not being able to take criticism is probably one of the things that does actually cause people to wash out or simply give up instead of not being able to improve with criticism.
Yeah, and I want to add, as one part of this taking criticism, another is just basically sticking around. And back in the early days, TR used to have problems with basically people claiming a large amount of land and then just disappearing, or they just stopped working on the project. And so then sort of part of this, let's say, hidden tests of character in the showcases is whether you're really interested enough in modding for TR that you sort of stick around for the showcase process, and bring it to completion, so that you have a better idea of whether you'd actually, when you grab a claim, whether you'd actually complete it.
Yeah, and then there was my showcase, which I was kind of the other way around, is that I came in at a slow point in Tamriel Rebuilt, and so I think it ended up staying up there for a few months. But that's part of the showcase process too, to realize that sometimes on our end we go through dry spells where there's not as many reviewers around, and to not take that as a sign that you're bad or that we don't want you. It's just that things slow down sometimes. It's kind of how the process goes.
So, kind of moving on to a different topic here. How does Tamriel Rebuilt deal with the lore from the later Elder Scrolls games? Obviously, games like Elder Scrolls Online are going to be quite different lore-wise from Tamriel Rebuilt's vision of the Morrowind mainland. And I'm kind of curious, is there anything that you actually take from the later Elder Scrolls games for Tamriel Rebuilt's lore? Or would you say that Tamriel Rebuilt sticks to its own interpretation of the lore based on just vanilla Morrowind?
Well, first of all, let me face that by saying that we do have a formal lore policy in place, which is in our About section. Basically, Tamriel Rebuilt has lore based on first Morrowind, the game, the first pocket guide of the Empire, some out-of-game texts of roughly the same era, and then TR lore. As strange as that sounds, TR is again 16 years old at this point, and there have been several lore developments and considerably backstory made for TR, which does not in this case, does not in this scope exist with the later games. And particularly the political development has been considerably, well, I don't want to say dumbed down, but it's considerably less complex. So basically we are staying with the political landscape and the ecological landscape of the first pocket guide, mostly, and extrapolate from there. This is something that is more relevant to the Project Tamriel mods, because they are recreating the older vision of Cyrodiil and Skyrim, which has already led to some discussions, as people sometimes consider them, or even consider us, not following canon anymore. However, since there are currently 4 strains of canon, I think we're doing fine. Basically, what we are taking from the later games is the rough political development, the fall of the Empire, obviously, the Oblivion Crisis, and some of the upheaval of the Red Year. Whereas ESO Elder Scrolls Online takes place in the Second Era. However, its political landscape, its ecological landscape, and the development during the game is pretty much not something that is compatible with even vanilla Morrowind, so we pick and choose, basically. I'm pretty sure the others will go into more detail there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to look at is just ignoring PR for a moment. The Elder Scrolls themselves conflict with lore, and one sort of common example of that is, for example, that with the first Pocket Guide and with Morrowind, though there are only 1 or 2 references Morrowind, Cyrodiil is described as a jungle, while in Oblivion, Cyrodiil clearly isn't. And so then, clearly we have to sort of pick and choose which game we go with, and obviously we're going to take Morrowind first, isn't that how it is in Morrowind? And so that's with the conflicts between games, and as Atrayonis said, there's also the thing that with 2 of the games, with Oblivion and Skyrim, they take place at later dates, and also in different locations, in different provinces. And so for the most part, they don't really overlap with Morrowind in our era. That they're mostly just some sort of pieces of lore and so on that we can pick or choose whether we want to use. I mean, especially with the Dragonborn expansion for Skyrim. But for the most part, it all happens after a timeline. So we can decide if we want to foreshadow some of that, maybe. But for the most part, we don't really need to worry about it. Of course, with ESO, because it takes place earlier, there it's quite different. And there are cases where there's lore that TR already made, which ESO then conflicts with. But I mean, there are also cases, amusingly enough, where the developers seem to have basically taken TR lore with some of the place names, for instance, and used it in their games. So there things can get a bit odd, but in general, we have our priorities, as Atrayonis said it, and I'm sort of always up for taking inspiration from other games if it's not incompatible with the world that we're building. But in the end, we want to build a coherent world, and it has to be said that all of the other Elder Scrolls games taken together don't build a coherent world. They sort of each tend to stand on their own and don't really translate directly to one another.
Yeah, so basically each new Elder Scrolls game is always their own
interpretation.
Yeah, precisely. It's that of the Elder Scrolls universe. So, like Gnomey said and Atrayonis said, they stand on their own feet, and so basically we can we can just treat the newer, later Elder Scrolls games in the same manner we treat the games that have come before Morrowind. So we can do precisely what Gnomey said. So we can choose the good parts from Elder Scrolls Online or Oblivion or Skyrim in the same way that we can choose what is good in, say, in Daggerfall, for example, and we can do that.
Yeah, and I do want to add that another point, though, is that, of course, TR can't only stick with Morrowind lore, Morrowind era lore, because in filling out the mainland, there are a lot of gaps in Morrowind lore which we then need to fill, and that's, for example, that in vanilla Morrowind very little is said about Indril, and very little is said about House Stress, and so we need to make things up. And those are cases where if there's already lore in the other games, we might take that, or we might create our own stuff. That's where it's more open for interpretation. Obviously, though, where Morrowind era, as in from the game Morrowind, where lore exists, we tend to go with that. But even then it actually gets a bit complex, because Morrowind was built to be a closed-off, complete game world, as opposed to Vattenfell being part of a larger province. So there's some lore in the game Morrowind, which sort of makes it hard for TR to exist as part of the same world. And obvious case, there's the sort of idea of the quarantine, which is just one or two throwaway lines in the vanilla game about how basically travel to the mainland is closed off. And so there are rare cases where even within the game Morrowind, we might consider basically departing from what is said and sort of having our lore take precedence, I suppose. But we really try and limit that.
Right, so one of the things that really comes up is that TR Morrowind lore in general is only limited to that one game and sometimes the first pocket guide. What I think is rather important to realize is that Morrowind or Redguard even both were a visible reboot of the series. The development team that created Morrowind also created Redguard, and most of them also Battlespire. And this is the kind of lore era that TR follows. The development team that created Morrowind is split even with Tribunal. The Blood Moon development team was considerably different already. Some of them stayed around with Oblivion and Skyrim, but the people who created Morrowind just weren't the same people that created later games. And that also means that the development that went in outside of the game, in the apocryphal texts, what the Imperial Library calls it, was considerably wider in scope than the later games, which has lore development to not to support the game, but to supplant it with its own interpretation of what goes on behind the scenes. And this makes Morrowind lore and, in conclusion, TR lore much wider in scope.
So I think talking about the lore, especially with Elder Scrolls Online, which is one I'm familiar with, it's really kind of like opening a can of worms over at Tamriel Rebuilt. One of the problems is that if you took into account every retcon that has happened since Morrowind, we'd probably never get done over in Tamriel Rebuilt because we'd have to keep redoing our mod each time a new game comes out. I think the others have got it pretty well covered in terms of the overview. I just wanted to point out some examples. One of the biggest differences with our plans of the Deshaun Plains is that it's very different from the Deshaun as it's portrayed in the Elder Scrolls Online. We still have these plains as it is in the name, and these salt flats. And Elder Scrolls Online kind of resembles more of a marshland to transfer down into Black Marsh. And something some people don't recognize is that the landmass itself is generally the same. We call it differently. The Elder Scrolls Deshaun correlates pretty well with our Enderal regions of Antherin and Old Orthon. So you kind of have to take that account into your headcanon.
Yeah, specifically with the Deshaun, that's a sort of interesting case because over time TR has become also more familiar with Morrowind, with the planning behind Morrowind, and I think also more information has come out from former developers and such. And so with the Deshaun, for instance, the first pocket guide says some stuff about how the Deshaun is. And then there also exists an old concept map from Bethesda, back when they were planning to do the whole province, before they limited themselves to just the island of Valdenfell, which shows the sort of large central plain, which is quite different from TR has it. And the problem is just that TR wasn't aware, and already made a lot of that landscape, and then basically saw, oh wait, it was supposed to be like this. And that was one case where TR then in that case decided that it didn't want to, redo the massive amount of land. And so, personally, as I think we have found a good compromise with how we're doing the Deshaun Plains, that they fit the description pretty well in the first pocket guide, and that we're sort of trying to move a bit closer there. But that's one case, for example, where with again, that's another example actually of where we ended up sort of prioritizing PR lore over vanilla lore, just because we didn't want to redo so much work, for that reason.
I think it's worth noting that as lore has moved on, as the games have moved on, that TR itself, Skyrim Home of the Nords, and Province Cyrodiil are considered by some to simply not be canon anymore. And this is another of these kind of worms. So you basically have people who say that because of the many-headed Talos, which was posted in a very specific circumstances, is an explanation as to why Cyrodiil has never been a jungle, and TR and Morrowind and Province Cyrodiil simply are wrong. That TR's portrayal of the mainland is wrong because ISO portrays it differently. That Home of the Nords portrayal of Skyrim is wrong because Skyrim portrays it differently. And at one point you just have to say that the games simply have irreconcilable differences. It's not pretty, but at some point you simply have to say that the different games cannot be reconciled. And the Elder Scrolls 3 province mods are doing their own thing. And that's, I think, what should be taken away from this. We are doing our own thing. We do have our basis in lore. It's not compatible with the post-Oblivion lore, which is most obvious in the Cyrodiil political landscape and the jungle, of course. And the religious landscape, which got the axe, pretty much, and has been getting the axe since.
At least that's where you go into things like Dragon Breaks and Coda, which then adds its own little layer of ways of going into the various discrepancies and why they are that way.
I would like to add the idea of there being inconsistencies with the different games, and saying that these projects, Tamriel Rebuilt and Province Cyrodiil and Skyrim Home of the Nords, that we are not canon. Yes, we of course aren't, and we could never be. Obviously, we are doing our own interpretation of what we think Morrowind could have been, but nothing here is official. None of it is ever going to be canon. So I think the inconsistencies, they might not be pretty, and they might irritate some people, but but these inconsistencies are so inevitable, and to me personally, at least, they are irrelevant. It means nothing to me that we are incompatible with Elder Scrolls Online lore, for example.
And I wanted to go into another kind of facet of the Elder Scrolls Online versus Morrowind and TR. Some of the differences are based, for instance, in ESO as their game design. You'll look into like their Morrowind zones, and they have Indral architecture all over, everywhere. There's no other kinds of Dunmer architecture. And I understand that this is a technical and budget limitation rather than what you would actually see there. So you kind of have to handwave that a little in your head and assume there are other types of architecture on the mainland in a different style for the Dres. And another thing to keep in mind along those same lines is that there have been, history-wise, there has been a lot of years between Elder Scrolls and Tamriel Rebuilt. There's been centuries. So we have, for the instance of Ebonheart in Elder Scrolls Online, it's an Indral architecture, and I'm told it's controlled by the Dres. I'm not quite sure. Well, in Tamriel Rebuilt, we assume all those Indral buildings have since been burnt down during the armistice in protest of its signing, and that was partly a design consideration on our part because we wanted a large Imperial town on the mainland for quest hooks and for the factions like the Imperial Legion to play in. And so it's, again, that idea that the needs of the game sometimes come before the needs of being consistent with the lore, and that can go both ways between ESO and Morrowind and Skyrim and everything.
I just want to add add a little disclaimer to what I said earlier about it meaning nothing to me that we have inconsistencies with Elder Scrolls Online. What I mean is that it doesn't bother me. And regarding what Kevaar said about old Ebonheart being into Imperial architecture style rather than Mournhold tile set, it also harkens back to the first Elder Scrolls game. So it's the DR version of Old Ebonheart is trying to be as faithful as it can be to the arena version of the old Ebonheart.
Okay, several things. First, Old Ebonheart, the consideration was there is also consideration that when Bethesda added Ebonheart to an actual game for the first time that wasn't Arena, because Arena was its own little thing, they put it on Vvardenfell because that was what the Elder Scrolls 3 actually had as game world. And then they turned it into the seat of the Empire. And to move on logically from there, you sort of had to make an Ebonheart, if you make an Ebonheart on the mainland, also an Imperial settlement, because otherwise the whole naming scheme wouldn't make any sense. I think we did some good work there. Well, my predecessor, sorry, now I'm doing it too. The old lore creators made a good had a good idea to have the Mournhold style Ebonheart burned down during the armistice in a sort of mass suicide. And then it was settled by the Empire, which then went on to create a suburb on Vvardenfell when that became opened. However, that is something that TR is sometimes criticized for by people who say that Ebonheart should still be in Mournhold style. However, that is one of the problems I have with this, is that there is very little sense of history. The armistice was several centuries ago. The political landscape changed radically. And the political development since then has changed considerably, even more the last couple of decades. Remember that by the time of Morrowind, the game, that Vvardenfell has only been opened for colonization for 13 years, and there were only a handful of settlements there before, the temple settlements and the three house capitals, Ardrun, Balmora and Zatrathmora. And this lack of sense of history is or has always been a problem with the Elder Scrolls. Morrowind does try its best, and the other games, well, not Oblivion, but Skyrim sometimes does try by placing books and the old Nordic ruins. But one of these things that Bethesda does display is the current situation, and then an ancient past, and very little in between. And this is something that TR2 is filling out, which is largely political history that is usually glossed over. And one final point, the games are always displayed in scaled down version, always. The scale of ISO is different than the sort of consistent one between Morrowind and the latter games, which does already add some problems to an already compressed game world. Now, for example, we have some people that are trying their hardest to try to get TR to incorporate Bleakrock Isle somewhere between Solstheim and Vvardenfell, just because it's there in ISO, and by the scale they want, it would just be 2 or 3 cells wide, because there just simply isn't enough place, and it just isn't big enough if you go by the scale of the Tamriel map that came with ISO.
Yeah, I mean, Old Ebonheart is one of those sort of very interesting, confused situations, because I mentioned that concept, the Bethesda map of all of Morrowind, back when they were planning to make all of Morrowind, and there Ebonheart is already Imperial, but it's on the mainland. But then when they reduced their scope to just Vvardenfell, they wanted to have Ebonheart as the Imperial seat of power, and so they just moved it over to Vvardenfell. But then way back when, the leadership of TR decided that they wanted Ebonheart to be the major Imperial seat of power, and so that ended up with a second Ebonheart, basically Old Ebonheart, on the mainland, as a much larger settlement, as a city. And in the Imperial style, consistent with the lore of Morrowind's time. And then, of course, ESO comes along and has it in the Dunmer style, which I think is probably largely due to gameplay, but I mean, still, it's in the Indral style then, so that's a clear difference. And I mean, again, I think that is a futility, but of course, you know, in this case, we have tried to make sense of it, and we have given story reasons behind it, even though I don't think that's strictly necessary, but we could, and that does tend to lead to an interesting history, and sort of, as Atrayonis said, it sort of fills out the gaps. But, I mean, that sort of thing always happens, and again, also sometimes from TR not having looked closely enough at the information there actually is. That also with the Armistice, for instance, there's a lot of lore there which is hard to navigate around, and also a lot of information that's missing. And so TR has it sometimes assumed that the Armistice came after an invasion of Morrowind, for instance, when no invasion actually happened. And so that also obviously then makes us have to go back and change things or adjust things to have everything make sense.
And just to kind of bring it back to as far as players of these other games who like those other games and who also, you know, want to get into Tamriel Rebuilt, is that every little detail like that can be up for debate to some degree. We can go back or just as an example, we were going over some of our old interior designs, and we found this one that that didn't really fit the exterior that it went in, because the inside was very grand and the outside was just kind of, tucked away in this little hill. And so we went around and we looked into Elder Scrolls Online, and we said this interior looks a lot like Eliath Temple, which is something that is new to Elder Scrolls Online. It's an Ordinator training camp, training citadel, whatever you want to call it. And so just to give this idea that sometimes the lore does pass back and forth between the two games, but it's kind of on a case-by-case basis of what works in our interpretation. And some things just won't, period, no matter how much you squish on them and try to get them into that pig-shaped hole.
So to summarize, lore is like a bill of ketchup. You always want to put it on with something, fries or sausage or a steak, but you just don't go and suckle up the entire bottle.
Alright, so sort of going along with the lore topic here, and going on with the Tamriel Rebuilt's planned edits to the vanilla game with regards to the main quest and things like that. What exactly are the differences going to be with, Tamriel Rebuilt's implementation with Almalexia and Mournhold from the Tribunal expansion?
Yeah, basically, the thing that I'm not sure how well we've communicated is that with Kevaar's change of stance on basically Tribunal, and really the same thing goes for Blood Moon, is actually basically not to touch it. That we don't really do, with a slight caveat, but that basically we don't change anything with Tribunal, and we probably won't change anything with Blood Moon either, and we'll more or less sort of ignore them. And so that's for the expansions. And so the idea is that in the case of Tribunal, because it obviously creates the sort of center of Almalexia, the Morrowind's capital, we decided that we would rather just create our own Almalexia entirely and ignore Tribunal's implementation, because Tribunal's implementation was, among many other reasons, because Tribunal's implementation was not designed to be part of a larger game world, as in the exterior, which led to a lot of complications in implementation. So our stance with basic Blood Moon and Tribunal is that we'll basically copy the things from Tribunal over to a greater or lesser extent, but that the actual expansions would be more or less untouched themselves. We'll just use their ideas and their models and such. With Vattenfell, that obviously doesn't really work because it exists in the exterior game world. That to properly tie the mainland to the island, we do need to make some changes. And that's really on a case-by-case basis, and that's one of those cases where we really encourage people to come to us and basically to discuss what they'd be alright with, what they wouldn't be alright with. And on our part, what we sort of have to do is that we have to be good at communicating in a timely fashion what concrete changes we are planning to make when we decide on them, and give people enough time to provide feedback. And so if we decide, for example, these are the changes we're going to make to House Lalu, to Vanilla House Lalu, that we communicate that to people so that people can say what they think of the changes, and that we can then sort of reconsider things and decide how we're going to do things in the future. And so, again, the expansions won't actually be touched. The only thing is that with Tribunal, we might basically cut off the Dark Brotherhood Assassin script, so that you don't get called to Tribunal's Mournhold in the first place. But that is the most we're going to do, and that shouldn't really create any incompatibilities. And so there shouldn't be any incompatibilities with the expansions as such. But Vanilla Morrowind then is very complex, and again is on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, just to expand a bit on the idea of disabling the Dark Brotherhood attacks, as that may not be so well known. There was a discussion when we decided to change our stance on Tribunal and to basically not work with Tribunal. There was a discussion on whether we would, by default, disable the Dark Brotherhood attacks, so and then also offer a plugin in which they are re-enabled, basically. And that means that without that plugin, basically, the Tribunal world still exists, but again, you are never able to go with it because you don't get the initial Tribunal quests, which then provide you passage to Morrowind, to Tribunal's Morrowind. And then the other option was to do the opposite and leave the attacks enabled by default, and then have an additional plugin that disables them, which frankly other mods do as well. But that's the sort of thing where, again, where feedback is very welcome, but as it is a rather minor change, I think just to one script, that there's no hurry on PRs and on applying the change if it's going to be applied, and it's, I think, quite easy to reverse as well. So that's the thing. That's really the only change we considered for Tribunal, and it's a very minor one actually.
So Gnomey has already said that Morrowind's Mournhold, it's not even the full Almalexia, is not made with the mainland in mind. I would like to elaborate on that a bit. So basically people have the idea that Mournhold could work as a sort of hidden city. However, what it actually is a suburb full of outlanders in the heart of the government. It's basically as if you had your capital, the Supreme Court, and in between are a bunch of little hamlets or little village-style buildings full of new immigrants from Spain or Germany or somewhere. It doesn't really work. It doesn't make any sense if you think about it. It doesn't even work as a circle, so we couldn't just plop it into the mainland because it's non-Euclidean. It's just not a proper settlement. It's not a circle. It's just a couple of walls and a couple of buildings inside. So what we are doing is taking it out this time, because it was one of the bottlenecks of all previous Almalexia incarnations, and then building a whole city that actually makes sense. That's the plan, and it's going to be the plan for a long time, because we do not want a repeat of the last few times where we had created an Almalexia after months and months of work, and then it turns out that it doesn't work at all. This will not happen this time, I hope. As far as the quest line is concerned, there are some differences in opinion on how much of it we will implement. However, that is only as far as some of the side quests go, like the very strange robot battleground. The main quest line will be ported, so re-implemented with our own journal entries, etc., etc., so that there will be no conflict with Tribunal as far as you can control it.
But what was sort of clear when this discussion came up in PR is that there were quite a lot of differences of opinion with basically with how much to port over and how much to change. And that did actually even include the Tribunal main quest, because some people felt that the writing on that wasn't quite so strong, that it sort of forced you too much into a particular position and such. And so that's, again, as said, a lot of these things are on a case-by-case basis, and how much we port over is included. And so there are going to be a lot of interesting discussions to come on that, I guess. I I think it is pretty clear that we want to re-implement the sort of main points of the main quest, but how exactly we do that still needs to be discussed.
And just to hammer the point home, that is not even currently in planning. We are planning on planning that later. It's not final, and that is actually up in the air. How much and how soon that will happen, and how much we will change. So to clarify how that work with mods that modify Mournhold, since the tribunal content will be as untouched as possible, all the mods that change tribunal or the tribunal quest line or Mournhold itself will still work. They just will connect to the Mournhold interior cells, whereas TR's Almalexia and re-implemented tribunal content will be all part of the world space, the mainland, and new interiors, new NPCs that have the same names but different IDs, different journal entries, everything. So mods will still work, and they will still do their thing. You just will need to go to the Mournhold interior cells to access them. And as far as Solstheim is concerned, there was a discussion on the TR forum a few years back that it could be moved, should be moved. However, that is what I ended up doing, and it's not part of TR, and will not be part of TR. TR will pretty much not touch Solstheim. Period.
I understand when you made that mod, there are a lot of technical hurdles that you had to overcome, and that's one of the reasons we won't be moving Solstheim is to, for instance, make room for Bleak Rock, because it has the potential to break a lot of little nitty-gritty things.
Yeah, the actual way this is implemented was that I deleted the Solstheim landmass completely, and then moved a copy of it with test faith to the location that Anthology Solstheim and Anthology Tomb of the Snow Prince have. And as such, it does break everything. It breaks dialogue. Every single dialogue line had problems with the cell triggers. And of course, you can't really apply mods to this without moving them with test faith too. So that's way too much impact for anything TR would want to do.
So going on to our next topic here, I wanted to ask your opinions about the other province mods for Morrowind, like Province Cyrodiil and Skyrim Home of the Nords. What do you think of these province mods, and do you think we'll ever see, a sort of united Tamriel Rebuilt mainland with Skyrim Home of the Nords and Province Cyrodiil?
Myself, yes. I'm looking forward to it. I might still be looking forward to it for a few years.
I think that the other province mods are just excellent. I've been intentionally trying not to be too familiar with them. Otherwise, there is this danger of me getting involved in other projects, and it would take time from TR work. But Skyrim Home of the Nords recently had their first, I think it's their first release, and it was just pure diamond stuff. So yeah, I'm looking forward to a future, like a complete Tamriel for sure. But it's going to take a while.
So, as far as I know, and I wasn't around for it, is that historically speaking, TR sort of moved around like a 300-pound gorilla and said my way or the highway, and the other province mods were created in that climate of willful superiority. However, we have for the last few years grown considerably closer. For example, Tamriel Data is a project that was spearheaded by Project Tamriel, and TR was sort of a first adapter and cooperator in the whole endeavor. And we have all now moved to a sort of unified planning mapping system, so that we can coordinate our border regions better than ever before, so that the whole crossing the land border from one province to the other should only be a matter of time and manpower.
But yeah, I mean, especially recently, we have definitely started working more with the other project mods, and we of course have the shared data files, and so there is also some effort to really make the connection between the province mods cohesive, and not just to make sure that we don't overlap with cells in a bad way, but also that that we have smooth transitions between the provinces and so on. And so yeah, we definitely are looking towards having a cohesive, maybe even complete Tamriel if we go with a really ambitious idea, but definitely between Province Cyrodiil, Skyrim Home of the Nords, and TR, that we are really working together. And I mean, the other project mods did also start in the furthest west part of the province to give TR as much time as possible to complete its border, so that they can properly adjust to it. And so already from the beginning there seems to have been consideration to work with TR on their end, and now TR is doing a bit on our end as well.
I had really come into the Tamriel Rebuilt project back when it was still Tamriel Rebuilt, when we were hoping to create the entire continent. And we later decided that it was like too much of a project to ever get done, and restricted ourselves to Morrowind. And so for me, it's been great to see that opened up again, and that enthusiasm come back, to start looking at more parts of Tamriel, not just Morrowind, even though I love Morrowind.
One other thing where we are cooperating is, of course, lore, since the Empire of Cyrodiil is, of course, situated in Cyrodiil mostly. So there is some cooperation between the political setup of the Empire and the occupying forces and the Imperial civil government. That is fairly new. There have been some talks about setting up more of a coordination with our Redoran quest line, which is at least in part about an uprising of one of the local Nord faction, the Nelnok Reavers, which have been governed by the Redoran since the fall of the First Empire. And this would coincide with one of Skyrim Home of the Nord's more political quest lines, the rise of High King Theon, the same guy who would later go on and take over Solstheim during Oblivion's time frame. And we are currently actively coordinating in the border region between Morrowind and Cyrodiil, as we have to diverge in border ideas. Namely, the Blue Road ends up at a different part where our border would place the border pass, the bigger border pass. So there is currently very specific discussions there going on.
Alright, so moving on to one of my last questions here. Where do you see Tamriel Rebuilt in 15 years? Do you think it'll actually be finished by then? And will we be able to, play it with TS3 MP and have 100 players just running around the Morrowind mainland? Or, something of that nature?
Well, I'll answer the easy one first. You can already play TR with TS3 MP. So there are already players running around on it. The more difficult question is, in 15 years, I would expect most of the landmass to be done, and we should have been able to start tackling the honest integration of the factions by then. would be very optimistic to say that TR would be done by then, because there are still some bottlenecks like Almalexia or the inevitable reworking of the Talvanis, the first release we had. But other than that, I think it should be very nearly done if we could keep up with an increase of manpower. If it's the current manpower levels, I think we should still manage to be done with the British Han by then. But very little else.
I think it'd still be going. I say that in a cavalier way because, to me at least, the fun is in the process of the modding itself, not necessarily in the finished product. Even though I'm looking forward to that too. There's a lot of Tamriel Rebuilt that I haven't played, having been gone for a good span in the middle there. So, yeah, whatever comes, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think that the project probably won't be done by then, but the thing's that it's so hard to track to make estimates about that, because it depends so much on the individual enthusiasm of whoever is currently active. And when there are, active and very enthusiastic people who are contributing a lot to TR, then a lot can be done in a short amount of time. But then there are just some dry spells where barely anyone is around, and where people are busy with their real lives or with other things, and then you have months pass by with very little progress overall, and so it's just very hard to track. And I mean, with members in general, they come and go. For example, the Dark Elf guy interviewed Haplo a while back, and he was with the project for a really long time, but he ended up leaving too eventually. And so that always makes it very hard to judge how progress goes. But I mean, I think in 15 years I'll still be around, and TR will still be around, and hopefully we'll have made a lot of progress by then.
I know it must sound a little bit disheartening to hear us saying that in 15 years we probably won't be done, but I think we're just being brutally honest here and not making any promises we can't keep. And it's true what Gnomey said, that we can't really predict anything. It's all very unpredictable how people come and go, and there are indeed dry spells, but there are also really short periods where we are moving rapidly forwards and getting lots of stuff done. So yeah, one could say we are up in the air.
And I mean, I'd like to add that, with our assuming that TR would still be active 15 years down the line, we'd very much be happy, of course, if people came and proved us wrong by contributing. So please feel welcome to prove us wrong on that guess, as we do hope that we're wrong, even though I think all of us do enjoy working on TR.
Alright, this kind of brings me to my next question. In each of your opinions, what's the biggest challenge for Tamriel Rebuilt going into the future? And what would you say is the biggest challenge right now for the project at this exact moment?
I'd say manpower to both, with probably the lore discrepancies and making people happy about the lore discrepancies as a second.
I would add to that keeping the current workflow and decision-making process going and not revamping it the first time someone has a problem with it.
Yeah, I completely agree with Atrayonis with basically keeping the current workflow and such. And I agree with Kevaar that I think that the manpower is definitely the largest issue. But I do think that at the very least what TR has gotten better at and is still getting better at is to actually keep records of its plans and what it has done and so on. So that even if some members become inactive, that there is still a lot of information that's available. Not as much information as you'd like, but the point is that there's far less risk now of basically having to start over from scratch. And so even if the project sometimes gets slim periods where not a lot of people are contributing, that people will be able to, come along and pick it up and continue it moving forward.
Yes, I too have to agree with the others that one of the biggest challenges is not to lose any of our momentum that we have already. So, yeah, that's a thing. That and global warming.
I do have to say, though, as for my part, for example, for me, TR is a hobby, and I didn't really plan to leave TR at any point. That's, as said, 15 years on, I'll still probably be contributing to TR, assuming you haven't proved me wrong and finished it. And so, that's sort of thing that I don't necessarily think that TR will ever completely die. But clearly, if it does end up with, for instance, just me plugging away at it, it'll probably never actually get done. And so for me, manpower is more an issue if you actually, want TR to get done. But I'm not sure if the project will ever die as such.
Yeah, I think that we are past the point where we could have died, it was ages ago, and now we are inevitable, and we are not going to die. So I think we're in that sense good, even if it's just the four of us in the end. But I don't think we are at the risk of dying.
Oh yes, I definitely agree with that sentiment. Tamriel Rebuilt is over 15 years old now, and just how many modding projects actually last 15 years? Or even half that amount of time? You see game development studios only lasting for a few years sometimes, and Tamriel Rebuilt just keeps on going like the Energizer Bunny from those commercials.
Yeah, it is a sort of interesting point that I think that some people have started to join TR who were born, basically who are younger than TR is, basically who were born after TR started. And that's because people have often actually joined TR at a relatively young age, as say I think I was 13 or 15 or thereabouts, and many of the others as well. And of course Morrowind is older than that, so it's this odd thing that some people are basically modding for a game that's older than they are.
Alright, so kind of in closing here, my last question is, what is your favourite non-Tamriel Rebuilt related Morrowind mod?
To be completely honest, for me this isn't a very easy question, because, or a bit of a funny story to it, because I actually started, for a long time I actually didn't have the Blood Moon expansion, and I actually started contributing to TR without the Blood Moon expansion, which required me to actually do some pretty complex things to my interiors so that they'd be compatible with TR, and so that's a sort of a funny fact. But, the point is that actually I think it's the case for a lot of people that that we probably mod much more than we actually play the game, and so I haven't used any mods in a long time. But I am looking forward to, for one thing, obviously the other province mods, to exploring those. And also I'm quite enthusiastic about Open Morrowind, and especially the Morrowind multiplayer. But, at the moment I really only start Morrowind to test TR stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same situation for me. So the non-TR mods that I have, that I enjoy, are basically just the unofficial code patch and that sort of thing.
I understand I'm kind of strange in that I actually like the number crunching mechanics of Morrowind over some of the more action RTS mechanics of the later games. So I don't really have any mods that modify the game. I do, however, download story mods. I think my favorite one out of those is Julon, the Ashlander mod, the one that gives you a companion.
Well, I can't really quite name the same what someone else has chosen, of course. and I have some theoretical mods that probably would put in first place, but I haven't actually played Sothersill Expanded, so I'm going to go with Uvirith Legacy.
Alright, I guess that's basically all the questions I have for you. Thanks for doing this podcast with me today.
Thank you for putting it on.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. It was nice to take part in it.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for this nice interview.